Imagine you're chatting with your boss. She asks you a question about an approach to social media marketing. You were just reading a book about this last night, so the topic is fresh in your mind. You're ready to answer, but what you say is,
"Sorry, my knowledge on this topic is derived from a copyrighted work. Here is a link to Amazon where you can buy a copy of it to read yourself."
That'd be weird, right? Your boss probably wouldn't be too pleased. And that's not the way the accumulation of knowledge works for humans. But in the debate about AI, a tool that as our co-pilot is being thought about as an assistant or a colleague in our work, that is one potential road we may go down because of our copyright laws and because of the assertions of copyright holders. In this video, I want to dig into the issue of training AI. And how should the ownership of the material that's used for training be thought about, managed, and compensated? Since the introduction of ChatGPT last year, the issue of ownership of training data for AI models has come up again and again. We have seen various efforts through which content owners, whether they be well-known authors or celebrities, artists, even Reddit and the New York Times, have tried to put up roadblocks, legal and otherwise, to having their content consumed by AI companies in the training of their models. There are good reasons for us to be concerned about what data our AI companions are trained on. A training dataset consisting of only the New York Times versus only Reddit would clearly lead to some very different understandings around topics of importance to our world. Unless the data demonstrates a broad range of the experiences we have and the concepts we've come up with as humans, AI will be limited in its ability to help us in a relevant way. But the issue I'm talking about today isn't really connected to that quality issue, apart from my concern that if rights holders to high quality work aim to have it extracted from our AI models, what would be left? While there have been various arguments against using certain data for AI training, most of them come back to one thing: compensation. Those who assert ownership rights over certain content that could be useful to AI training datasets want their slice of the pie that these companies will generate with the AI models they have trained. And given that the AI economy could be worth up to $13 trillion by 2030, according to McKinsey, which if it were a country in its own right would be the world's third largest economy based on 2022 data, who can blame them, right? Well, it makes perfect sense, apart from the fact that in most cases we don't license knowledge in this way. A rights holder is completely entitled to compensation when their work is consumed, but they don't normally get residuals based on derivative output, except in situations where those derivatives are substantially similar to the original. Under copyright law, we have concepts such as fair use, but we also have thousands of years of human history where we can see a line where our knowledge today simply derivates from those issues that have been the subject of work in years gone by. Let's do a little quiz. I'm going to describe something, and you go ahead and think about what I'm describing. Maybe write it down, maybe call it out. See if you can guess. So number 1, I'm green, I'm kind of slimy, and I can jump really well. What do you think that is? Well, if you thought frog, then you'd be right. Number 2, I'm covered in black and white stripes. I look kind of like a horse, and I live on the African plains. What do you think it is? Did you think zebra? Number 3, I'm a building on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., where the President of the United States lives. Did you think White House? But assuming you can get some or all of those correct, can you tell me how you know these things? Did you learn them from a copyrighted work? Did you see them in a copyrighted picture? Has the rights holder given you permission or licensed that information in such a way to allow you to use it for your benefit in daily life? Think about everything else you know. Are you sure that in your last meeting at work you didn't inadvertently regurgitate something you read in a blog for which you're not the rights holder? If you excluded every piece of information you've ever consumed that was delivered by a book or an article or a photo or a video that may be owned by someone else, how much would you know now? It's tricky, right? This is a knot that's very hard to untie. While I can put together a list of specific sources for a lot of my content, there's a lot of the flavour of what I talk about that's simply built on years of knowledge. I have no idea why I know many of the things I know, and there certainly isn't a demarcation in my brain for copyrighted and non-copyrighted material. But you're probably thinking, why is this relevant to the issue of AI? Well, while AI doesn't learn in the same way humans do, its accumulation of knowledge is in some ways remarkably similar to ours. When we come across someone who seems to know a lot and can reference a lot of information, we will sometimes describe them as being well-read. In some ways, GPT-4 is just the most well-read intelligence on the planet. It just happens to be an artificial one. In general, when we describe a person as well-read, it's as a result of them showing off their knowledge, and it's a compliment. I'm not sure whether there's ever been a case where a human being described as well-read has resulted in them being questioned as to whether they legally obtained the books they've been reading or had properly licensed the knowledge they used, whether that well-read person is a poor student or whether they're a billionaire CEO. We just take for granted that they have spent time accumulating knowledge, and many of us respect that. And we don't place a knowledge tax on the benefits they've accrued from that knowledge, financial or otherwise. In my opinion, by focusing on the value generated with knowledge and attempting to find a way of sharing in it, many content rights holders are inadvertently seeking to upend centuries of progress in how we educate and better our society that was initiated with the development of the printing press. And if any modern author or artist claims that anything they have ever produced is truly original and not developed through standing on the shoulders of centuries of accumulated knowledge and art in our society, then they're just kidding themselves. But more than trying to upend the status quo, it gets worse. Have you heard of subliminal advertising? This is the concept that if you insert a message or idea in a piece of media, maybe a video or an audio ad for example, that is below the threshold of human conscious perception, that your subconscious will still pick up on it. The efficacy of this approach to communicate anything is debated, but there are limitations on this sort of messaging in certain jurisdictions because ultimately, as humans, we don't particularly like the idea of our subconscious brains being gamed by someone to their advantage. Imagine if this approach were used in the teaching materials used in schools. Perhaps a textbook publisher takes that page that taught you that the White House is the White House and secretly inserts content that tries to convince you that the structure is actually Buckingham Palace in London. Maybe it sends those particular textbooks to the school districts that pay the least for their materials, or it sends them to the school districts that refresh their materials less frequently than the publisher would like. This ends up as a penalty on knowledge based on the book's rights holder's perception of some financial slight or other. You have a bunch of children out there in the world whose knowledge has been intentionally poisoned for commercial reasons, and as a society we have no idea what the long-term implications of that might be. The good news is that as far as I know, that isn't going on in schools. The bad news is that some innovative individuals with issues with AI are attempting to do it for AI model training by similarly poisoning the digital images they publish on the internet. This technology advance called Nightshade was released as an open source poison pill by researchers at the University of Chicago back in October. Their goal is to give visual artists and image publishers a tool to protect their work by corrupting the AI dataset with images that show one thing, but the AI has learned show something else. But imagine if the University of Chicago sanctioned research that helped those textbook publishers protect their intellectual property by teaching a generation of school children whose school boards had not approved new book purchases that zebras were actually frogs. We would be outraged, and we should be outraged by this research, as we have absolutely no idea how far the long-term consequences of such actions will go. Now, I'm certainly not saying that rights holders shouldn't be compensated. They definitely should. And when we talk about rights holders, we aren't just talking about giant, wealthy corporations. We're also talking about individuals. We're talking about small businesses. I'm not arguing that anyone should be made worse off by AI, and it's really important that AI tools still provide us information like citations to make it really easy to go off and purchase or read the work if we need to. Anyone who currently makes their living, or even part of their living from creating copyrighted work, should be able to have a roadmap for the future with the inclusion of AI that allows them to continue being successful. But AI also shouldn't be some licensing gravy train that takes authors or artists who are making meagre incomes from their work and rewards them more handsomely on the off chance that it was their work that was critical to some answer that ChatGPT just gave. Just because companies like Microsoft and Google have deep pockets shouldn't radically change how we reward and compensate those who create knowledge in balance with the overall societal good of sharing it. Now, it's important to point out that there have been some elements reported around the training of AI models that suggest that outright stolen works have been used. This should be a line that isn't crossed, and it is and should continue to be illegal. AI companies don't get to opt out of the knowledge economy that already exists, but their use should be able to operate within existing guardrails without too much change and without radically altering anyone's protections. If you choose to publish your content on the open internet, you probably do so because it gives you some advantage in life or business. For example, I publish here on YouTube as it helps me participate in the wider tech community. I sometimes get clients from people who watch my videos, and I gain connections that are relevant to my interests. It's for me to assess whether publishing on YouTube, which is open to everyone, is what I want to do. But once I've made the decision to put content here rather than behind a paywall somewhere else, I don't get to decide in any substantive terms who gets to see it and who gets to distill the information I share. But there are different paths. With my new book, Who's in the Co-Pilot Seat, I've made a different business decision. I've published that book for commercial sale, and if someone wishes to have a copy, they need to buy it. But again, once they've bought or otherwise legally obtained a copy, if they use the information that book contains to their benefit, including their financial benefit, as long as they don't infringe my copyright by regurgitating my content verbatim, I don't get a say. And talking of paywalls, these are odd things. A while ago, ChatGPT had to remove its web browsing function because it was defeating paywalls and presenting non-public information. However, to my understanding, it's not like the AI was seeing the paywall and hacking its way in. The way that paywalls are implemented is rather fragile in lots of cases. Some websites publish the full text for search engine indexing to get up the Google rankings. Others allow a certain number of articles to be read before the paywall kicks in. In some cases, paywalls are really just presentational elements on a page, rather than something clever going on in the background of a website. The point is that in the cases I'm familiar with, an AI's ability to access paywalled content has come down more to how the publisher has chosen to publish their content in order to drive the most traffic to it, rather than some malicious act on the part of the AI vendor. Perhaps if I left copies of my new book on tables at coffee shops across the city, I would sell more copies, or get more clients. And maybe not. But we wouldn't consider anyone who picked up one of those books and read it to be stealing my content. The fact is that in the online world, publishers often do one thing with their content and then lean on their terms of use to regulate it, where if you compare to a largely similar approach in the physical world, it simply wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. I have no business in what any consumer of my content gets out of it, other than wanting to make the best content. If you take what I say or write and turn it into a business 10 times the size of mine, good for you. I have no remedy further down the road to come knocking on your door to say, actually, when I charged you $12 for my book, I really meant $12 million because you've done so well. That just isn't the way the transfer of knowledge works in our society, and creating a road for it to become the way the transfer of knowledge works, in my opinion, is a very dangerous path. For published works that aren't accessible on the open internet, there is already a perfectly suitable, non-copyright infringing model that could work today for AI training. That's the public library. Libraries buy books and other materials and are able to share them widely in the pursuit of maximising society's knowledge. We see libraries and their content as a public good, and authors are pleased to see their work in libraries for the most part, rather than seeing it as theft. Libraries are able to operate because of both legal protections and licensing agreements, and many are transitioning to a more digital world where their content isn't solely books on the shelves. The concept of a library, both as a source of knowledge to turn a non-reader into someone who is well read, and a model for how protected content can be shared without harming copyright holders, is in my opinion the most readily relevant to the issue of both AI training and AI model use. After all, if someone who becomes a tech billionaire shares a life story that involves them starting with no books at home and relying on the public library to allow them to break barriers of social mobility, they are lauded as an example to us, not derided as a thief. Companies like Microsoft, like Google, like OpenAI, have the resources to build the fullest libraries known to our civilization. And that is what they should be encouraged to do to train the tools that will be the next chapter of our planet. And those who are trying to poison the well of knowledge should not be held up as warriors for the rights of creators, but as troublemakers against one of the pillars of the betterment of society, our ability to build on top of the knowledge and creativity that has come before us. Ultimately, this is something from which we all benefit, and in my opinion, solving this problem is as simple as opening some new libraries that are as relevant to the AI challenges of today as they were to the literacy challenges of years gone by. It might require tweaking some laws or tweaking how some things are licensed, but in my opinion the model is already there. What do you think? Have I got this issue confused? Or should we be looking for a simpler and more universally beneficial solution to what has become a very complex question? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope this was useful to you. Until the next video, bye bye.